are pioneers and trailblazers. We fight for freedom. We transform our dreams into the truth. Our struggles will become a nation.
It honestly gives me chills every time I hear this or anything like it that reminds me of who we are, of our nation's history. I'm a lover of U.S. history, and I also believe it. I believe it all to be true. We did inspire nations. We did inspire nations, and we took these egalitarian values that were our theories. Nobody had applied them. They were just theories for hundreds of years. And we wrote them down. We declared our independence with them. And we fought hard for that independence, and we won. And then we founded our nation on a constitution that revived those values. And then we inspired nations, and we invited others to do the same like us. We became a beacon of light, and we spread it. We spread that beacon of light out to the world, and we invited everyone. We invited nations and said, give us anyone who you don't want, and we'll help them find their dreams here. And we invited people. We said, if you can't find freedom where you are, if you can't find your dream, if you can't work for your dream, if you're not allowed to do that where you are, come to our shores. And all together we will be America, and we'll do that together. And many people answered that call. Many of your ancestors, your grandparents, maybe your parents, my father, he came here answering that invitation. He wasn't necessarily escaping a war-torn land, which some people may have been doing. He had a sweet gig where he was. He graduated at the top of his class as an engineer and had a really good military engineering job at a time when the military was controlling the country, so he was in good hands. But he saw a little bit into the future, maybe, that he was going to have an activist son who might have been imprisoned or tortured if he was going to do some of the work he was going to do 20 years later. So he decided maybe it wasn't for him to stay in Egypt, and he came to America. And other men did the same. Even Albert Einstein was recognized as the world's top scientist at the time, but a dictator that you're very familiar with took over his nation, and his theories couldn't be put into practice like they could here in America. We took his theories and we were able to transcend space, and maybe one day we'll transcend time with his theories. And then a man like Philip Emeagwali, running away from civil war into refugee camp after refugee camp, is able to come to America and become a computer scientist whose theories are still being used today, one of the top notable computer scientists of his time, with theories still being used today to guide the field. And another man from a small town in Egypt called Damanhur, a small town where the best he could hope for was to be maybe a professor of chemistry. There's nothing wrong with being a professor of chemistry. That's an awesome job, by the way. But what he was able to do when he came here to America as chair of his department at California Institute of Technology was found a new field. He founded a new field called femtochemistry, which gave us insight into how time itself worked at the molecular level. That's Ahmed Zuwail, who passed away recently 2 months ago, and there was a military funeral for him in Egypt. Had he been in Egypt trying to do what he did, no way he could find what he did when he won the Nobel Prize in 1999. By now, I think it should be clear to you. I am a patriot. I do believe that we are the greatest nation on earth right now. But the question is, I didn't come to tell you that I'm a patriot. I came to ask you, am I less of a patriot? If I remind you that along with inspiring the innovation of those great men, we also innovated, unfortunately, in how to humiliate our human brethren for over 100 years. And that even after we emancipated ourselves from slavery, we still found ways to humiliate and to kill. Am I less of a patriot if I remind you that before all our ancestors, or the majority of us, were on these great shores, there were millions of peaceful dwellers of these lands? And that just one tribe, when gold was discovered in Georgia, 16,000 Cherokee Native Americans were forced at gunpoint by our U.S. Army off their native land to the far west of our nation. And what you all and I know from one small paragraph in our history books as the Trail of Tears, 6,000 men, women, and children died along the way? Am I less of a patriot when I remind you that we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's imprisoned? That 2/3 of people in prison are minorities? Or that a black man is 6 times more likely to be imprisoned in our land than a white man? Am I less of a patriot when I remind you that 1 out of 5 women can expect to be sexually assaulted in our land, and that most likely the perpetrator will walk away in 18 months? Am I less of a patriot when I remind that in 2015 alone, 105 unarmed black civilians were killed by police? Only 10 of those officers were charged with anything, and only 2 were convicted. And that in this year, 2016, one of those victims, not those 105, the additional victims we had this year, was a man who said to the police officer that he had a weapon that was licensed on his possession. And he was shot and killed in front of his 3-year-old stepdaughter who was in the back seat. Or another man was selling unlicensed tobacco to feed his family because that's all he knew he could do to feed his family. And he's choked to death while he says, "I can't breathe." Am I less of a patriot when I remind you that 400 wealthiest Americans, the Forbes 400 list, has more wealth than 16 million African American and 5 million Latin American households combined? 400 people. Am I less of a patriot when I remind you that 22% of children in our land, any school across the nation, 1 out of 5 kids will be bullied for how they look, or what their ethnicity is, or what their religion is, or what their body shape is? Or am I less of a patriot when I remind you that even though my father escaped that authoritarian regime in Egypt, that everyone in the world knows that that authoritarian regime was propped up with the millions and billions eventually of aid and the friendship of our global foreign policy? And the same for many dictators like him. The thing is that I think you might be suspicious of my patriotism when you know my name is Omar, Muhammad, Ali, Atia, Hassan. Or that maybe when I'm a little bit angry, like I am now, that I might look like this man. The thing is that we've defined patriotism. We've allowed patriotism to be defined as those who sing the praises of the nation, those who are willing to stand up for the flag because the flag is what represents our nation. And when you stand up for the flag and you sing the praises, you're recognizing that we are the greatest nation on earth. And yes, I recognize we are the greatest nation on earth. But I also recognize that a real patriot, a truthful patriot, one who sees that path to greatness, knows that being the greatest in this world we're in today doesn't mean it's enough, because our world is in a bad place. Being the greatest means that we see the failings and the injustices just as much as we see the glory, and that we're willing to accept and stand up and call out and still love our country and love to work with our country and for our country, all of us together, to recognize those failings and work to end them. An American before us, the late, great Muhammad Ali, when he decided, when the Vietnam War was still popular, it was still patriotic to go and fight for your country in that war, he said, "I have no quarrel with no Viet Cong that never called me an N-word." And he was vilified, unpatriotic, un-American, stripped of his championship and fined for his unpatriotism. But then the war became unpopular, and all of a sudden, he was actually a hero. And it wasn't until we were able to give him the torch to carry, like our Statue of Liberty, that we accepted him as our ambassador, as one of our greatest Americans. Or was that too late? Did we learn our lesson when a couple of decades later, a man named Chris Jackson, the sweetheart of Louisiana, one of the best shooters in the history of the NBA, the best hands down in the history of LSU, he was the dream coming into the NBA. And he chose to change his path slightly. When his teammates would go out partying, he would go to the inner city of the cities he was in and talk to those young men in the inner city about the meaningful lives they could lead, about the change they could make in their lives. He was doing one of the most patriotic things any of us can do. But he decided one day, after he saw what he was seeing in the inner city, that he wasn't going to stand up for the national anthem just to show importance to what he was calling to. And then he was vilified. He was unpatriotic. And within a year and a half, he was out of the NBA. We heard this story recently. But maybe because now we can have the conversation on a broader scale because of social media or because we're willing to listen maybe a little bit more. That's what I hope. That's what I want to believe. Colin Kaepernick didn't have to do it alone for as much or as long as these other men did. And pretty quickly, a Navy veteran, yes, this man is a white Navy veteran wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt. I want someone here to tell me this man is unpatriotic, having put his life on the line for our nation and for you and I to be sitting here. Or that these young men who all they had to do was win a football game on Friday night and be the sweethearts of their high school, they chose to do the unpopular thing, to stand up and say that they will stand up by kneeling just during this time. The thing is that we can all be those patriots. We can strive for the better of the world because that's where our greatness is. Our greatness is not at the expense of others. It's not by subjugating others. We don't gain our security by others being insecure. We don't gain our prosperity by others being enlabored for free or almost for free. We have to stand together as one people, knowing that anything that's a failing is my failing. I sing the praises of my nation, and I also own the failings of my nation. I am the slave master, and I am the slave. I am the Cherokee Native American, and I am the Army general who forced him off his land at gunpoint. That's all me, because I'm American, and I'm proud to be American. And in being proud to be American, I'm willing to sing the praises of my nation, and I'm just as willing to stand up and say what's wrong that I'm willing to work with my brothers and sisters here to do. And we have to be truthful when we look in the mirror. No one of us looks in the mirror and just sees the beauty. We look in the mirror at night to see what we need to fix. In the morning, before we leave, we do it so that we can face the world. Why are we willing to face the world and not say what we see in the mirror about ourselves as a nation? We have to teach our children that you are a patriot when you know that you accept that your nation has given you a greatness that you're living in. Don't take it for granted. But we also teach our children, do not allow injustice to stand, and you watch it happen because this is your nation and you believe in the glory and the greatness of your nation. We have to see the greatness and see the failings. And we have to be the ones who redefine patriotism. It has to be about the greatness and also honestly owning our failings. The thing is that if we do this, we can all together then have a nation that we're all siblings, we're co-citizens, and we want what's best for our nation. So tonight, I'm asking you to ask yourself. I'm asking you to take 2 minutes. Ideally, take 10 minutes. But if you can't, take 2 minutes. But do it alone, in seclusion, and ask yourself this question. I want you to ask yourself, am I a patriot? Thank you.